I'm not sure how to start this because I've always been the type of guy who keeps his personal life private. But right now, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, and the only thing keeping me grounded is the hope that maybe someone out there has been through this too. Maybe someone has some advice, or maybe writing this down will just help me process it all. Here's some context. I'm 32, married to Madison for 7 years. We met in college. She was the life of the party, and I was the guy with a part-time job who stayed behind to clean up after everyone. Opposites attract, right? Or at least, that's what I used to think. Madison has always been the kind of person who can charm anyone. Her laugh fills the room, and her confidence makes you believe she could take on the world. I fell for her hard, and for a while, life felt like a dream. But lately, things have been different. Let me rewind a bit. We've had a rough couple of years. I work construction, which means long hours and unpredictable pay, especially in the winter when jobs dry up. Madison, on the other hand, has been trying to build her online boutique business. She spends her days designing clothes and uploading them to her website, trying to drum up sales on Instagram. It's a grind for both of us, but I thought we were a team, working towards something better. About 6 months ago, I started noticing little things. Madison stopped waiting up for me when I came home late. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, was suddenly glued to her hand. When I asked her what she was so busy with, she'd wave it off, saying she was networking with influencers. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. Still, I didn't push it. I told myself I was being paranoid. Madison's always been independent, and I figured I was just projecting my own stress onto her. We were barely scraping by most months, and I hated the idea that my financial struggles might be putting a strain on her too. Things came to a head 2 weeks ago. Madison mentioned that she needed to meet with a potential investor for her boutique. She dressed up like she was going to a gala, hair curled, makeup flawless, wearing a dress I didn't even recognize. It stung a little, seeing her put so much effort into something that didn't involve me, but I told myself I was overthinking it. She left around 7 p.m., and by 10 I still hadn't heard a word from her. I texted her, "Hey, everything okay?" No response. At 11 I called. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't sleep much that night. I was pacing the living room when she finally walked in at 1:30 a.m., heels in hand, hair slightly disheveled. She looked startled to see me awake. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "My phone died," she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "The meeting ran late, and I didn't want to wake you." It didn't feel right. Her explanation sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the car. But what was I supposed to say? Call her a liar without proof? So I swallowed my doubts and told myself I was just imagining things. The thing is, Madison's mood has been all over the place lately. Some days she's sweet and affectionate, like the woman I fell in love with. Other days she snaps at me for the smallest things, like forgetting to take out the trash or leaving my boots by the door. I get it, life's stressful. But it's hard not to feel like I'm walking on eggshells around her all the time. I know this is a long post, but I need to get it all out there. I want to believe in her. I want to believe that we're just going through a rough patch, like any couple. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that there's something she's not telling me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm overthinking it all. Or maybe, just maybe, my instincts are right, and I'm about to discover something I'm not ready to face. For the next few days after that late night investor meeting, things were tense between Madison and me. She acted like nothing had happened, like walking in after midnight with a flimsy excuse was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, I was trying not to let my doubts consume me. I told myself that if I kept digging for trouble, I'd eventually find it, even if there was nothing there to begin with. But that little voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "Something's wrong." The following Saturday, I woke up early to head out for a side gig, a remodeling job that would bring in some much-needed cash. I was supposed to meet my buddy Greg at the site, But just as I was heading out the door, Madison stopped me. "Hey," she said, her tone unusually soft. "Why don't you take the morning off? You've been working so hard. I can make breakfast, and we can just hang out for a bit." It caught me off guard. Madison hadn't offered to make breakfast in, well, I couldn't remember the last time. I almost said yes, but then I remembered the overdue bills on the counter and the empty gas tank in my truck. "I can't," I said, trying to sound casual. "We really need the money." Her face fell for a split second before she plastered on a smile. "Of course. I get it. Maybe another time." As I drove to the site, her words gnawed at me. Was she genuinely trying to connect, or was it guilt? Maybe I was reading too much into it, but something about her sudden sweetness felt forced, like she was overcompensating for something. Greg and I spent the day tearing out old drywall and prepping the space for new insulation. It was grueling work, but I welcomed the distraction. Still, Madison was always there in the back of my mind. Around lunchtime, I pulled out my phone to text her, only to find a message from her already waiting. "Hope you're having a good day. Miss you." Miss me? That was odd. Madison wasn't the type to send sweet texts like that out of nowhere. I should have been happy, but instead, it felt off. When I got home that evening, Madison greeted me at the door with a big smile, dinner already on the table. Chicken Alfredo, one of my favorites. "I thought you deserved a nice meal after working so hard," she said, kissing me on the cheek. It was sweet. Really sweet. But the whole time we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a performance. I didn't want to be suspicious, but the sudden shift in her behavior was hard to ignore. After dinner, while Madison was in the shower, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just proof that I was being paranoid. But as I unlocked it, yes, I knew her passcode, I realized her texts were all too clean. There were no casual chats with friends, no group messages, no random notifications from her usual apps. It was as if she'd scrubbed it clean. Before I could dig deeper, I heard the water shut off. I quickly put her phone back on the counter and went to sit on the couch, pretending to scroll through my own phone. When Madison came out, her hair wrapped in a towel, she looked at me with an almost suspicious glance. "What are you up to?" she asked, her tone light but probing. "Just scrolling," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to believe that Madison's sudden affection was genuine, that I was just being an insecure idiot. But her clean phone, her carefully curated actions, it all felt too calculated. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. All I knew was that I needed answers. The days that followed felt like a tug-of-war between my rational mind and my gut. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Madison continued her streak of sudden affection, cooking meals, leaving little notes in my lunchbox, and even offering to rub my shoulders after a long day. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like being wrapped in a blanket that was just a little too tight. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a rerun of The Office, I decided to test the waters. "You've been really sweet lately," I said, keeping my tone casual. "It's nice, but I gotta ask, is everything okay?" Madison looked at me, her expression perfectly composed. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "Just feels like something's on your mind." She laughed, a little too quickly. "Ethan, you worry too much. I've just been trying to show you how much I appreciate everything you do for us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the tightness in her smile and the way she immediately looked back at the TV told me I wasn't getting the whole truth. The next morning, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I needed answers, but I didn't want to accuse Madison outright, at least not without proof. Instead, I started paying closer attention. It didn't take long for me to notice that her work schedule was oddly flexible. Some days she'd be glued to her laptop for hours, but on others, she'd casually mention running errands that seemed to take up most of the day. I thought about asking her to let me help with her boutique, maybe as a way to spend more time together, but something stopped me. If she really was hiding something, I didn't want to tip her off. That evening, an opportunity fell into my lap. Madison had gone out to meet a supplier and left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I hesitated for a long moment, feeling like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I thought about the bills, the sleepless nights, the gnawing doubt that was eating me alive. I opened her laptop and started looking through her email. At first, everything seemed normal: work-related messages, promotions from stores, the usual stuff. But then I stumbled upon a folder titled Archived. Inside were dozens of emails, some dated as far back as 2 years ago. Most of them were about her boutique, orders, collaborations, and the like, but a few stood out. One subject line caught my eye. Let's talk next steps. The sender's name wasn't familiar, and when I opened the email, my stomach twisted. It wasn't anything damning, but the tone was oddly personal. Words like, "looking forward to seeing you," and "our last meeting was amazing," jumped out at me. Who was this person? I jotted down the name and email address before closing the laptop, my heart racing. Madison walked in minutes later, smiling as she set her purse on the counter. "Hey," she said, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "What's for dinner?" I was thinking pasta," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. As we ate, I couldn't stop thinking about that email. It wasn't enough to confront her, but it felt like a breadcrumb, a small, suspicious detail that hinted at something bigger. Later that night, while Madison slept, I pulled out my phone and started searching. The email address led to a social media profile, a man named Brandon, with a professional-looking headshot and a bio that mentioned marketing consultation. Was this her supplier? I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't see yet, and the urge to dive deeper was almost unbearable. I knew I had to be careful, though. If I pushed too hard too fast, I could blow everything up before I even knew what was really going on. For now, I decided to wait. I didn't have enough to go on yet, but I was starting to piece together a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to see completed. After finding the email and connecting it to Brandon, my mind raced with possibilities. Was this guy really just a business contact, or was there something more? I tried to convince myself that I was jumping to conclusions, but that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let it go. The next few days I kept my head down and played along, pretending everything was normal. Madison seemed none the wiser, going about her routine with the same mix of affection and unexplained absences. But behind the scenes I was on high alert, watching her every move and keeping an eye out for more breadcrumbs. One afternoon, Madison mentioned she was meeting Brandon for coffee to discuss marketing strategies for her boutique. She said it casually, like it was no big deal, but the mention of his name sent a jolt through me. "Oh, Brandon," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "The marketing guy?" "Yeah," she replied, not even looking up from her phone. "He's been helping me with some ideas to grow my audience. He's really good at what he does." I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's great. Maybe I could meet him sometime?" She hesitated for a split second before replying. "Yeah, sure. Maybe." That hesitation was like a flashing neon sign. I decided then and there that I needed to dig deeper. The following day, while Madison was out running errands, I sat down with my laptop and started researching Brandon. His professional profile looked squeaky clean, just a guy with a background in digital marketing and a knack for helping small businesses. But something about him seemed too polished, too perfect. I scrolled through his social media, looking for any signs of a connection to Madison. It wasn't until I reached his tagged photos that I found something. There was a picture of him at a small business conference from a few months ago, smiling alongside several attendees. And there, standing next to him, was Madison. The caption read, "Great to meet so many passionate entrepreneurs at this year's summit." It wasn't incriminating, but it was enough to confirm that their relationship went beyond a few emails. They'd met in person, and she hadn't mentioned it to me. Later that evening, I brought it up casually. So, how did you and Brandon connect? I asked while we were cleaning up after dinner. Oh, he reached out through my website, she said without missing a beat. He works with a lot of boutique owners. I nodded, playing it cool. That's awesome. Did you guys meet at a conference or something? Her hands froze mid-scrub, just for a moment, before she replied. Yeah, actually. I think I mentioned that a while back. She hadn't. As I watched her carefully avoid my gaze, I felt the walls closing in. Madison was lying to me, and I was running out of excuses to give her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, I decided to take a small risk. Before heading to work, I asked Greg if he knew anyone who could help me out with some tech stuff, specifically accessing deleted texts. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, just handed me a number for a guy he knew who owed him a favor. That evening, while Madison was in the shower, I quickly copied her phone data onto a USB drive using software the guy had sent me. My hands were shaking the whole time, but I managed to finish before she came out. The next day, I met up with Greg's contact, a tech-savvy guy named Darren who specialized in recovering data. This'll take a couple of hours, he said, taking the USB drive. I'll call you when it's ready. Those hours felt like an eternity. I kept going back and forth in my head. What if I didn't find anything? What if I did? By the time Darren called me, I was already a wreck. I met him in the parking lot of a diner, where he handed me the drive back along with a printout of recovered messages. There's a lot of stuff here, he said, giving me a pointed look. Good luck. Sitting in my truck, I flipped through the pages. Most of the messages were mundane, work stuff, chats with friends, but then I found it. A series of deleted texts from Brandon. The tone was friendly, but there were undertones I couldn't ignore. Phrases like, I always look forward to seeing you, and, you're such a breath of fresh air, jumped out at me. One message, in particular, sent a chill down my spine. Let's keep this between us for now. Don't want to mix business with personal stuff too much. Personal stuff? I clenched the printout in my hands, my mind racing. This wasn't enough to confirm anything, but it was clear that their relationship wasn't just professional. For now, I decided to keep playing the waiting game. If Madison was hiding something, I needed more than vague messages to confront her. The next few days were an emotional minefield. On the surface, everything looked fine. Madison was her usual mix of overly sweet and mysteriously busy. But inside, I was a mess, obsessing over the texts and wondering how much of our life together was built on lies. Then, something happened that I didn't see coming. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Hello? Is this Ethan? A woman's voice asked. Yeah, who's this? My name's Rachel, she said, her tone cautious. I'm Brandon's wife. I nearly dropped the phone. Of all the things I expected, this wasn't even on the list. What? I stammered. I'm sorry for calling you out of the blue, Rachel continued, but I think we need to talk. It's about Madison and Brandon. My throat went dry. How do you know about Madison? There was a pause before she said, I found some messages on Brandon's phone. I recognize your wife's name, and I did some digging. I got your number from a mutual contact of theirs. I know this is a lot, but can we meet? I think we both deserve to know the truth. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, but I managed to agree. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop later that evening. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting in the corner with a cup of tea. She was petite, with sharp features and a no-nonsense expression. As soon as I sat down, she slid her phone across the table. I didn't want to believe it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But when I saw these... I picked up her phone and scrolled through the messages. They were worse than the ones I'd recovered. Brandon and Madison had been talking about more than just marketing. There were plans for meetups, inside jokes, and subtle hints that their relationship wasn't as innocent as Madison had claimed. One message from Brandon stood out. "You're the only person who really gets me. I can't wait for Saturday." Saturday. The day Madison had a networking event. "What do you think this means?" Rachel asked, her eyes searching mine. "It means we've been lied to," I said, my voice cold. Rachel sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I knew Brandon was capable of being flirty, but I never thought he'd actually cross the line. And your wife? She's been acting weird for months," I admitted, cutting her off. "But I didn't want to believe it either." We sat there in heavy silence, the weight of our shared betrayal hanging in the air. Finally, Rachel broke it. "What do you want to do about this?" I hesitated. I wanted to confront Madison right away, to demand answers. But part of me knew that if I acted now, I'd lose the chance to get the full picture. "I need more proof," I said finally. "I need to know for sure." Rachel nodded, understanding. "Same. Maybe we can work together?" It felt strange teaming up with Brandon's wife, but I agreed. We swapped numbers and made a plan to keep an eye on them. Rachel would monitor Brandon's movements, and I'd do the same with Madison. If they slipped up, we'd catch them. As I drove home, my mind was racing. This unexpected alliance with Rachel was both a relief and a curse. On one hand, I wasn't alone in this anymore. On the other hand, it confirmed that my worst fears were probably true. When I walked in the door, Madison was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting her phone down. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Slow day at work." I sat down next to her, trying to act normal, but my heart was pounding. I couldn't shake the image of Brandon's messages, of Rachel's hurt expression, of the web of lies that was slowly unraveling. Madison leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you're home. I miss you." Her words felt hollow. For the first time, I wondered if everything she said was just another layer of the performance. Instead, I wrapped my arm around her, playing the part of the oblivious husband while silently vowing that I'd uncover the truth, even if it destroyed me in the process. Madison was humming to herself in the bathroom that morning, the kind of upbeat melody you'd expect from someone without a care in the world. The sound grated against my nerves, not because of the tune, but because of the contrast. It felt like she was floating in her own reality while mine was sinking fast. The day before, she had casually mentioned her big networking event, throwing in the details as if they were an afterthought. "Don't wait up," she'd said, flicking through her planner. "It might run late. These things usually do." Late. Of course. She walked out of the bathroom now, makeup flawless and hair swept up in a way that screamed polished but not trying too hard. She caught me looking and smiled. "You okay?" she asked, almost too brightly. "Yeah, fine," I said, barely glancing up from my coffee. "Good," she replied, brushing a speck of lint from her sleeve. "I should get going soon. Wish me luck." "Break a leg," I muttered, the words bitter on my tongue. She leaned down to kiss my cheek before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. As soon as it clicked shut, I was on my feet. I didn't have time to waste. Rachel had texted me that morning. Brandon was on the move, and she was already trailing him. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and headed out. I didn't know exactly where Madison was going, but I had an idea. About a mile from our house, she turned onto Route 15, the same road that led to the Evergreen Inn, a cozy little place known for its secluded cabins. I'd only been there once, years ago, but I remembered it well. I followed her at a safe distance, keeping a few cars between us. She didn't seem to notice, her driving steady as if she had no reason to be on edge. That alone made me furious, her confidence, her audacity to assume I wouldn't question her. We reached the inn after about 20 minutes. Madison parked in the gravel lot, stepped out of the car, and looked around. For a moment I thought she'd spotted me, but then her face broke into a smile. That's when I saw him. Brandon stepped out of one of the cabins, his hand raised in a casual wave. Madison practically skipped over to him, and they disappeared inside. I sat there in my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they started to ache. My stomach churned, a mix of rage and humiliation swirling together into something I could barely contain. I sat in my truck for what felt like hours, staring at the cabin door. I wanted to storm in, throw it open, and confront them right there and then. But something held me back, a cold, calculated part of me that whispered, not yet. If I went in now, I'd be reacting purely on emotion, and Madison would just deny everything. No, I needed to be smart. A text from Rachel buzzed on my phone. Brandon's car is parked at the Evergreen Inn. I think they're inside. What's your move? I stared at the message, my mind racing. Rachel was right to ask. What was my move? I quickly replied. Same. Madison's here too. I need time to think. But thinking was the last thing I wanted to do. Every logical thought was drowned out by a mental reel of images I didn't want to imagine. Her laughing with him, the way she used to laugh with me. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone. If they were careless enough to meet here, they might be careless enough to leave evidence behind. With shaking hands, I started recording a video of their cars parked side by side, the cabin number clearly visible in the background. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Just as I was about to leave, something unexpected happened. The cabin door opened, and Brandon stepped out, alone. He looked around, as if making sure the coast was clear, before pulling out his phone and speaking animatedly into it. Madison didn't follow him, which struck me as odd. I stayed frozen in my seat, watching as Brandon walked toward his car. He popped the trunk, rummaged through it for a few seconds, and pulled out a small duffel bag. Then he hurried back inside the cabin. My stomach churned. A duffel bag? What was in it? Something about his movements seemed rushed, almost nervous. Was this more than just a sleazy affair? I couldn't sit there any longer. I needed answers, but barging in wasn't an option. Instead, I decided to get closer. I parked my truck a little farther down the road and made my way back on foot, staying out of sight behind the trees that lined the property. As I got closer, I could hear voices faintly coming from the cabin. I couldn't make out the words, but their tone was tense, like they were arguing. My heart pounded as I crouched beneath one of the windows, straining to listen. You said it'd be easy. Madison's voice snapped, frustration evident. I'm working on it, Brandon replied, his tone defensive. But you have to trust me. If we rush this, it'll blow up in our faces. Rushed what? My mind reeled. This didn't sound like two people sneaking away for a romantic weekend. It sounded like something else. I pressed closer, desperate to hear more, when suddenly the door to the cabin opened. I ducked back into the shadows, my heart racing as Brandon stepped out again. This time, he didn't have the duffel bag. He had a manila envelope in his hand. He walked briskly to his car, got in, and drove off without a second glance. For a moment, I considered following him, but something told me to stay. Madison was still inside, and she wasn't going anywhere. I waited until I was sure Brandon was gone before moving closer to the cabin. The door was slightly ajar, as if it hadn't latched properly when he left. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. Madison was sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. She didn't see me at first, too lost in whatever thoughts were running through her mind. When she finally looked up and saw me, her eyes widened in shock. Ethan? What are you doing here? I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My pulse was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. I could ask you the same thing, Madison. Madison shot up from the couch like a deer caught in headlights, her wide eyes darting toward the door as if looking for an escape. Ethan, she stammered, smoothing her dress nervously. What are you doing here? I told you I had a networking event. I took a slow step inside, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweaty, but I forced myself to keep my tone calm. Networking at a secluded cabin in the woods? Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words. Finally, she crossed her arms and scowled. I don't need to explain myself to you. You're acting like a stalker right now. I laughed bitterly. A stalker? Really? I just happened to see your car here, Madison. What's going on? She rolled her eyes, throwing her hands up in exasperation. You're unbelievable. Fine. You want to know what's going on? I'm meeting a supplier. Brandon's helping me source new inventory for the boutique. It's cheaper to deal directly with the supplier, and Brandon knew the guy, so he set this up. She gestured to the corner of the room where a stack of garment bags leaned against the wall. See? Clothes. Actual inventory. I glanced at the bags, my suspicion not entirely fading. Why not meet somewhere more professional? Like an office? She sighed, her irritation growing. Because the supplier prefers to stay under the radar, okay? Not everyone wants to run their business in broad daylight. This was the best way to get what I needed without paying triple for the same products. I looked back at her, studying her face. She was defensive, sure, but there wasn't the overt panic I expected if she'd truly been caught doing something worse. Where's Brandon now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He just left, she said, shrugging. He brought the samples, made introductions, and now it's my job to close the deal. Happy now? I crossed my arms, trying to mask my frustration. You could have told me about this. Instead, I had to find out by accident. Do you have any idea how sketchy this looks? Madison threw her hands up again. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd freak out, just like you're doing now. You're so paranoid lately, Ethan. It's exhausting. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I glanced at the garment bags again, trying to piece together if she was telling the truth. If she was, I was the one making this into something it wasn't. But if she wasn't, I just want us to be honest with each other, I said finally, my voice softening. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I am being honest. I've been working my butt off trying to make this boutique work so we can stop struggling all the time. I thought you'd be proud of me. The guilt started to creep in, but I shoved it down. All right, I said finally. I'll trust you. But if this is all legit, you won't mind if I ask a few more questions later, right? Her eyes narrowed for a brief second before she plastered on a tight smile. Fine. Ask away. But can you please stop treating me like a criminal? I nodded, backing toward the door. I'll see you at home. As I walked out, the doubts churned in my head. She'd deflected well, but something still didn't sit right. The garment bags were real. The explanation was plausible. The drive home felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Madison's explanation had sounded polished, almost rehearsed. But the garment bags, the supplier's story, it all added up just enough to make me feel like the bad guy for doubting her. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee from earlier, the tension gnawing at me. Was I letting my paranoia ruin what little trust we had left? Or was she just that good at covering her tracks? That night, Madison came home a little after 9, carrying one of the garment bags over her shoulder. She tossed it onto the couch like it was nothing, her expression casual as she kicked off her shoes. Hey, she said, her tone light. Sorry I'm late. Took longer to sort everything out than I thought. I forced a smile. How'd it go? Pretty well, she replied, unzipping the bag to reveal a line of trendy dresses. If these sell, we could make enough to reinvest in even more inventory. Brandon really came through for me on this one. There it was again, his name, spoken with a mix of gratitude and casual familiarity that made my stomach turn. That's great, I said, trying to sound supportive. He seems helpful. She paused for a moment, glancing at me with a slight frown. Ethan, I know you don't trust him, but he's just a business contact. I promise, there's nothing to worry about. Her words were so firm, so confident, that I almost believed her. Almost. We spent the rest of the evening in tense politeness, dancing around the invisible wall that had formed between us. Madison busied herself with sorting the dresses, while I pretended to watch TV, all the while replaying our conversation at the cabin in my head. The next day, things took an unexpected turn. I was at work, trying to focus on the remodel project, when my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "You free to talk?" I stepped outside, away from the noise, and called her back. "What's up?" I asked, my voice tense. Rachel sighed. "Brandon came home last night acting weird. He wouldn't tell me much about where he'd been, just said it was a work thing. But here's the kicker. He left his phone on the counter while he was in the shower, and I checked it." My pulse quickened. "What did you find?" "There was nothing about Madison," Rachel said, her frustration clear. "But there was an email, sent to himself. It was a list of transactions, like payments. One of the line items stood out, $5,000, labeled as a loan from a joint account." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "But it doesn't make sense. We don't have any loans like that, and I never approved anything." It was a strange detail, but it didn't directly connect to Madison, at least not yet. Still, it left me with an uneasy feeling. "Keep an eye on it," I said. "Let me know if you find anything else." When I got home that evening, Madison was sitting at the kitchen table, typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up as I walked in, giving me a tired smile. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Yours?" "Busy," she said, closing her laptop. "I was just going over some projections for the boutique." I nodded, heading to the fridge for a drink. "Anything interesting come up?" "Not really," she said, standing to stretch. "Just numbers. Pretty boring stuff." Her answer seemed innocent enough, but I couldn't help noticing the way she quickly shut her laptop when I walked in. Was it just a habit, or was she hiding something? The following days passed like a slow drip from a leaky faucet, each moment stretching longer than the last, my suspicions eating away at me. Madison seemed unfazed, gliding through her days as if everything was perfectly normal. She even suggested we go out for dinner one evening, a rare occurrence these days. We sat at a little Italian place downtown, sharing a bottle of wine. Madison looked radiant under the dim restaurant lighting, her laughter spilling out as she recounted a story about one of her clients. To anyone watching, we probably looked like the picture of a happy couple. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. "You've been quiet," she said, breaking me out of my thoughts. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, swirling my wine in the glass. "Just work," I lied. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment, searching, before she smiled and changed the subject. But that lingering look, it made me wonder. Did she suspect that I knew more than I let on? Or was she genuinely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me? That night, after we got home, Madison went to bed early. I stayed up, staring at her laptop on the kitchen table. The temptation was unbearable. She hadn't logged out, and as soon as I opened it, her email was staring me in the face. I started scrolling through the recent messages. Most were mundane, order confirmations, promotional offers, back and forths with potential clients. But then I found one that made my heart stop. The sender, Brandon. The subject, "Thanks for yesterday." I clicked it open, my hands trembling. "Madison. It was great to see you. The supplier was really impressed, and I think this could be a big step forward for your boutique. Let me know when you want to review the next steps." At first glance, it was harmless. Professional, even. But something about it felt too polished, like he was trying to cover his tracks. And why hadn't Madison mentioned it to me? I took a screenshot and emailed it to myself before logging out and closing the laptop. The next day, I decided to confront Rachel about her discovery. We met at a coffee shop, sitting in the corner where no one could overhear us. "I found an email from Brandon to Madison," I told her, showing her the screenshot. She scanned it, her expression unreadable. "It's vague," she said. "But you're right, there's something off about it." I nodded. "And what about the $5,000? Did you figure out where it went?" Rachel's face darkened. Not yet. Brandon's been careful. But I know he's hiding something. He's been keeping his phone on him at all times, even taking it to the bathroom. That's not normal. I lean back in my chair, frustration bubbling to the surface. I feel like I'm going in circles. Every time I think I'm close to figuring it out, there's another twist. Rachel looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Ethan, can I ask you something? Sure. What are you going to do if you find out they're, crossing a line? The question hung in the air like a bad smell. I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to confront her, to demand the truth. But the other part, what if I'm wrong? What if it's all in my head? Rachel nodded slowly. I get it. But if you keep digging, you need to be prepared for whatever you find. No matter what. Her words stuck with me long after our meeting. That evening, Madison came home late again, claiming she'd been at the boutique organizing inventory. I didn't question her, but as I watched her move around the kitchen, humming softly to herself, I couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could she keep up this act? The $5,000 loan, Rachel found, the supplier's story, Madison's guarded behavior. It was all part of a puzzle I couldn't solve. I decided to press Rachel for more details about the money. The next morning, she called me, her voice tense. I figured out where the $5,000 went. I gripped my phone tighter. Where? It wasn't a loan, Rachel said. It was a rental payment. For an apartment. What? I asked, stunned. Why would Brandon need to rent an apartment? Your guess is as good as mine, Rachel said bitterly. He told me he's been traveling for work a lot, but if he's got a place here, then he's not staying in hotels like he said. My mind raced. An apartment? Could this explain Madison's frequent absences? The supplier meetings. The networking events that always seemed to go late? Do you know where it is? I asked. Rachel hesitated. I do. I looked up the rental company. It's a small complex downtown. Apartment 3C. A sense of determination settled over me. I need to see it. That evening, while Madison was at the boutique, I drove to the address Rachel had given me. The complex was modest, nothing fancy, but not rundown either. It was the kind of place you'd rent if you wanted somewhere private, off the radar. Apartment 3C was on the second floor. I made my way up the stairs, my heart pounding with every step. The hallway was empty, eerily quiet except for the muffled hum of a TV in one of the other units. When I reached the door, I stood there for a moment, debating my next move. I didn't have a key, obviously, and I wasn't about to break in. Instead, I knocked lightly, half hoping no one would answer. There was silence on the other side. No movement, no voices. Just as I was about to leave, a neighbor's door opened down the hall. A man in his 50s, wearing a bathrobe, stepped out, giving me a curious look. You looking for someone? He asked. I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. Yeah, a friend. Brandon. The man frowned, scratching his chin. Oh, the tall guy? Black hair? He lives here part-time, I think. Keeps to himself mostly. Haven't seen him in a few days. My stomach sank. Does anyone else ever come by? A woman, maybe? He gave me a knowing look, the kind you'd expect from someone who lived in the same building for decades and seen it all. Yeah, I've seen a lady around. Dark hair, pretty, always dressed nice. She's here pretty often. I nodded, my throat dry. Thanks. I left the building, my thoughts spiraling. The neighbor had just described Madison perfectly. She'd been coming here. Frequently. As I sat in my truck, staring at the apartment building, a text from Rachel came through. Any luck? I replied. It's worse than we thought. She's been here. Rachel called me immediately. What do you mean? I explained what the neighbor had told me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Rachel finally spoke. So they have a place, she said, her voice laced with anger. A private little getaway. That's where our money went. Yeah, I said, my chest tight. It all makes sense now. The late nights, the vague excuses, everything. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I can't let this go on any longer. My mind raced as I drove home. Madison was walking a tightrope, and I was starting to see just how far she'd fallen. But now that I had this new piece of the puzzle, I was ready to confront her. For the first time, I felt like the truth was within reach. And I wasn't going to let her slip away without giving me answers. When Madison walked through the door that night, her smile disarmed me for a moment. She looked so carefree, like she had the world wrapped around her little finger. But this time, I wasn't playing along. Hey, she said, setting her bag down on the counter. You're home early. Yeah, I replied, my voice cold. Figured I'd change things up. You know, keep it interesting. She froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm my suspicions. She turned, her face carefully neutral. What's with the tone? I stood, the chair scraping against the floor, and walked around the table until I was only a few feet away. Where were you tonight, Madison? Her eyebrows knitted together in confusion. At the boutique. I told you that earlier. You're lying. Her head jerked back as if I'd slapped her. Excuse me? I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshot of the email from Brandon, holding it up for her to see. I know about the apartment. I know about Brandon. And I know you've been lying to me for months. The blood drained from her face. What apartment? What are you even talking about? Don't. I snapped, my voice rising. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know. I went there, Madison. I talked to a neighbor. He's seen you coming and going. So just stop lying and tell me the truth. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. Is it just a fling? I demanded. Or is it more than that? Are you in love with him? Planning your future together in some cozy little hideaway I paid for? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not this time. You're not even denying it, I said, my voice breaking. Do you know how humiliating this is? How much I've twisted myself in knots trying to believe you? To trust you? It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice shaking. Then tell me. I shot back. Tell me what it is, Madison, because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear. She wiped at her eyes, taking a shaky breath. Brandon rented that apartment to use as a workspace for my boutique. That's why I've been going there. We've been working on inventory, planning shipments, and meeting with suppliers. That's it. I laughed bitterly. And you expect me to believe that? After all the late nights, the excuses, the lies? You were at the boutique tonight? Really? Then why did Brandon leave work early today? Her mouth opened, then closed again. Yeah, I said, shaking my head. That's what I thought. It's complicated, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Complicated? I repeated, fury bubbling to the surface. You've been sneaking around, lying to my face, and using our money to fund some fantasy life with him. How is that complicated, Madison? She looked away, silent, and in that moment, I realized the truth. She wasn't going to admit it. No matter how much evidence I had, no matter how cornered she was going to take this lie to her grave. I trusted you, I said, my voice cracking. I've been killing myself to keep us afloat, and this is how you repay me? With secrets and betrayal? Her tears flowed freely now, but I didn't care. Say something, I demanded. Anything. She finally looked at me, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant for it to get this far. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. So it's true, I whispered. She nodded, her head hanging low. It wasn't supposed to happen, Ethan. I swear. I was just so frustrated with everything, our money problems, the distance between us. And Brandon, he was there, offering help, and I cut her off, my anger surging again. You what? You decided to throw away everything we built together? For him? She didn't answer, and her silence was the final nail in the coffin. Pack a bag, I said coldly. What? You heard me. Pack a bag and leave. Tonight. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. Ethan, please. We can fix this. No, I said firmly. We can't. You made your choice, Madison. Now you have to live with it. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. She turned and walked to the bedroom, her sobs echoing through the house. As I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, the weight of everything crashed down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all mixed together into something I couldn't name. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving the house in an oppressive silence. I stood there, staring at the spot where she had been, the echoes of her sobs still faint in my ears. A part of me wanted to collapse, to let the weight of it all crush me. But instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table, staring out the window at the dark night. I'd spent years building a life with Madison, years filled with love, laughter, and struggles we faced together. Or so I thought. Now, I was sitting in the ruins of it all, trying to make sense of how things had gone so wrong. The truth is, I didn't have all the answers. Maybe I never would. People make choices, sometimes selfish, sometimes desperate, and those choices ripple outward, touching everyone around them. Madison's betrayal wasn't just about her and Brandon. It was about something broken in both of us, something we ignored until it was too late. I thought about the years I'd spent putting work first, convinced that providing for us financially was the only way to keep us afloat. I didn't notice the cracks forming in our relationship until they became chasms. Did that excuse what she did? No. But it forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I'd been neglecting the emotional foundation of our marriage. That night, as I lay awake in an empty bed, I came to a realization that changed the way I saw everything. Life isn't just about the big things, the career, the house, the savings account. It's about the small, everyday moments that build trust, intimacy, and connection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and listening when it's easier to tune out. Madison made her choice, and I made mine. Letting her go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that save you in the long run. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to regain my independence. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, leaned on my family, and even started therapy, a step I never thought I'd take, but one that helped me unpack everything I'd been carrying. Life is messy. People are flawed. But even in the aftermath of betrayal, there's a chance to rebuild. Not with the same pieces, but with something stronger, something that reflects the person you've become. As for Madison, I haven't spoken to her since that night. Last I heard, she moved out of state, starting fresh in her own way. I wish her well, not because I've forgotten what she did, but because holding on to bitterness only hurts me. And now? I'm learning to live for the moments that matter. One step at a time. One day at a time. Because at the end of the day, life is about growth, not perfection. And for that I'm grateful.